the No Name Cinema Society, Episode 6. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I am your host for the evening of this lovely little cinema movie discussion show, and we usually start with a modern film. And I've got my very interesting, somewhat attractive cohorts here, starting with the nomadic David Joseph, that we lovingly call Davy Joe. Davy Joe, where are you tonight? What part of the country are you in tonight?
I am in Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah. Detroit, Michigan. Back in his old stomping grounds. He's never in anywhere different. There's Jay Money. Good afternoon,
Hello.
Jay Money.
How's it going?
So let's start tonight. As you know, we're talking about the Dreamworks film Home, their animated film that came out last weekend. I think March 27th or 8th. I think it was the 27th that came out. So, opening thoughts. Who went first last week, guys? I don't remember. Was it Jay Money?
I think it was me.
All right, Jay Money, you're up first. It occurred to me Davy Joe could have just lied.
I mean, he is known for it. So.
Yeah, so he avoided going first. But Jay Money, 2 sentences on Home.
I think that it's interesting that the last movie we reviewed, I criticized heavily because I thought the source material was terrible, and that the movie, because of that, was terrible. But in this time around, I would say that the movie I fault for not following the source material on this thing.
Okay, Davy Joe?
I thought it was a lighthearted, fun time. The kids were dancing in the aisles, so I guess it was pretty successful.
Were you dancing in the aisles? I was impressed with the creativity of the film, and it's funny. One thing that I've noticed about Jay Money is, Jay, you frequently, you have this habit of taking external circumstances, particularly like trying to assign something to a film, like a company, instead of looking at what the director's trying to do. You sort of tend to judge films based on the company's motivation. And in this particular film, I found it like there were a lot of elements that were creative, but it added up to a complete mess. And this is an example of where I do think that this film was created to sell toys and for no other good reason. So, and in their interest in selling toys, they forgot about narrative structure altogether.
Can I just defend myself there for 1 second?
Yes.
What I would say is that I don't know if that's necessarily true with how I look at film in general. It has been true in terms of the movies that we personally reviewed, because I haven't really seen a lot of evidence of there being much directorial sense in the movies that we reviewed. They do seem to be driven primarily by studio concerns. Well,
I mean, and I find it hard to judge a movie on those merits, but in this particular case, it felt like a deterrent to the film. It genuinely felt like the focus was elsewhere. Focus. See what I did there? Backed up. So quick synopsis for you guys, for the audience that hasn't seen it. Basically, the Boov are these cute little alien species. The main one is named O, and he's named that because whenever he walks into a room, people sigh like, "Oh, it's an oh darn, there's that guy." So that's his name. He has no friends. And so the Boov basically invade planet Earth, lovingly invade planet Earth. They feel like they are helping the Earthlings by invading and taking over. But because they're running away from the supposedly even more evil people called the Gorg. And O accidentally lets the Gorg know that they're on Earth. So the Boov, and he meets this girl named Tip, voiced by Rihanna, I should say, and the two of them go about trying to find A, Tip's mother, and B, save the planet from the Gorg at the same time, while becoming best friends along the way. See, it's hard to do those synopses like off the cuff like that.
It is.
I'll tell you what, though, it was solid, man.
Davy Joe, you're a wuss for not trying.
You did great.
Thanks. He's only saying that because to make me to see if I can do it again for him. Davy Joe, why don't you go first with our more intense discussion? You seem to like Home more than anybody else. Why?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that I liked it so much. I'll tell you what. It looked great, and you know, it was kind of refreshing. You know, I don't see a lot of these animated films, but I feel like when I do see them, there's a heaviness to a lot of them, some kind of underlying sadness, and I don't have a problem with that. I'm thinking about Up, where you know, the kid had been abandoned by his father, and you know, there was a heaviness to it, and I get some of that from the Toy Story movies also. And this had absolutely none of that. I didn't think. And so I don't know. It was just kind of a refreshing change of pace in that regard. You know, it was just a sort of a light-hearted, you know, movie about all the humans being put in internment camps, and you know, you know, I saw there were tons of kids in the theater, obviously, and they were having a good time. So you know, it was fun.
J Money, what about yourself?
Well, it's funny because I think in contrast to David Joe's experience, the kids in my theater really didn't seem that enthralled with it. And I don't know if it's just, you know, East Coast kids in general being too cynical and jaded to really kind of appreciate a fun movie. But like there was a lot of pretty silent reaction to a lot of the jokes, and I feel like that's definitely one of the major problems I have with this movie in general. I think if I was going to list out everything, number one is the fact that I think the premise skews too far from where the original version of this was, and this movie is actually based off a book called The True Meaning of Smack Day, which came out in, I think, 2007. Secondly, you know, the script itself just really lacked jokes in a lot of ways. It was a lot of really kind of obvious humor that you probably would expect to see in a kids movie, which is unfortunate because you know, there's an opportunity there with a lot of the cast that they had to really create something special.
The jokes fell flat.
The jokes fell really flat. But three, I don't, you know, for me, it's like I don't know why they cast Rihanna. I had a really hard time with her performance in this movie, and I think that helped flatten the movie on a whole.
I had a hard time with everybody's performance, and Rihanna's at the top of the list. J-Lo didn't help either.
J-Lo, my theory is that J-Lo was there just to round out like a pop star sort of roster, because I have no idea why otherwise she would have been there. Although, you know, interesting side note, in the actual original source material, the character of O is called J-Lo.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. Oh.
I don't care about the source material. I mean, I genuinely feel like when we evaluate these things, that can't really be a factor.
Well, I disagree with you because I think the source material was so much more interesting.
That may be well, but I mean, like, a movie has to stand on its own in either way. And I mean, like, and right. So that's, you know, that this movie wasted. I'm still talking. That's good to know that this movie wasted an opportunity, but I mean, like, it's very possible for both a book and a movie to be good and different separately.
Entirely. Unfortunately, in this it wasn't.
Example. No, I mean, like, you know, for someone that didn't know the source material and don't care, I mean, like, I thought the movie was still really disappointing, and the performances. I mean, I think that actually what it stems from theoretically, probably my number one issue, the most distracting thing about the film altogether, was the music and the soundtrack. Not necessarily the score, but I mean, like, there were 4 Rihanna songs, 2 songs, and Sierra XCX had a song, and interestingly enough, none of the songs seem to match the moments. You know, when he's famously dancing in the air like he just doesn't care, that becomes a running gag. It's to a song that's not that up-tempo. It's sort of like medium tempo, and it doesn't seem like as much of a dance song. It's not like Rihanna doesn't have dance songs that they could have used. And at one point they played Only Girl in the World, which is at a bizarre time in the film. And so this is an example of it. That's where it started to feel like that they came up with this movie. They bought the book, saw opportunity for fun little toys, interesting little creature toys, and then came up with this idea of the soundtrack and then built the movie around that. The soundtrack didn't seem to match at all, and I think that's tied to the casting of Rihanna and J-Lo.
Well, and the other thing is that Rihanna was actually going to produce and release an entire album material based on the movie itself. So she was going to have like the second piece to this thing, which was going to be a complete standalone album, inspired by the movie of Home, ultimately. And then it just didn't end up happening for whatever reason. So she ended up releasing a couple extra singles with this. But it did feel to me in the same way that it was incredibly shoehorned into this process.
On the positive side, I do think that a lot of the details were very imaginative. And that's, I suppose, left over from the book. I credit the film for that, and that's really just the only thing I can give the film credit for, because as interesting as those ideas were, they sort of lost structural storytelling as a result. I think the plot itself was simplistic and uninteresting, and furthermore, I think the stupidity of the booth was not funny. Now, to David Joe's point, maybe this is all about us being more accustomed to more sophisticated animation, and this almost felt like it was for the preschool, instead of, like the films that David Joe referenced, Up and Toy Story, or maybe for some older children, and also a little bit for adults as well. And you could throw Finding Nemo in there, films with a little more heart.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that it's definitely skewed younger. No question about it, and I think it also sort of ignored the parents, which is, it's tough in the theater. It's probably not as big a deal at home when you can just put the movie on and go do some chores or something. But yeah, I thought that it was all flash and not a lot of substance, and I just kind of sat back and took it in, It's not a great movie, and there is not a whole lot of story. It just looks really nice.
There is a plot. There's definitely a plot. It's based on. Is it a full book, J Money? I don't even know.
It is a full book, yeah. I think it's
a novel.
I guess it's technically YA, which is why I bring up the fact that last week we were reviewing a movie based on YA, and this week we're reviewing a movie that's kind of based on YA. But I don't think it's a really thick novel. I don't think it's a novelette, maybe at most. And I've actually had a really hard time figuring out whether or not it's a graphic novel or an actual novel, because I've seen both versions of it online.
Oh, did you read it?
I tried to read some excerpts because I was actually very curious about this. Regardless of what you feel about the source material issue, there was a quality to the premise that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to kind of find out more about. So I looked around for it.
And what's the quality? What's the quality you're talking about in terms of the source material?
For me, it's like one of the most interesting parts of this movie was the first 10 minutes, and I don't want to give too much away, but I will say that I think it's a really interesting take on the idea of alien invasion. It's not an aggressive alien invasion. The Boob themselves are not aggressive in any way whatsoever. They're just smug, and
they're stupid.
They're smug and they're stupid, but it's also that they're ignorant. I guess for me, the point was that it was a really interesting idea that talked about, in a lot of ways, anti-colonialism. It was specifically referencing the idea of putting people outside of their societies into reservations because the people that are conquering them are not necessarily there for aggressive reasons, but just because they have the right of way, being superior.
I agree with that. Is there something... the anti-colonialism is sort of like an old concept idea, too. So,
Well, yeah, it's an old idea, but I guess what I would say is that most alien invasions that you see end up being much more violent because the act of overthrowing something is involved.
I agree with you that all these ideas, and there's so many ideas in the film that had potential, but none of them were realized. Well,
but JB, that's why it's important. But that's why I think it's important to know what the source material is.
Well, I'm just saying it doesn't matter necessarily. It's fine that the source material is strong. I'm just saying, I do think we have to as much as possible focus on the film itself, the storytelling itself, and not necessarily worry about all the external factors.
Yeah, but JB, if we're going to try to find fault with the movie, shouldn't we try to find fault where it lies? If it's the kind of thing where we can say, where did the process of this break down from the adaptation? If there was something interesting going on in the original material and then what they ended up with was this, which I agree with you entirely, this is kind of made to sell toys. Who was the one behind that? Was it the director's fault? Was it the screenwriter's fault? Where's the impetus here?
I mean, you're right. It's probably Katzenberg. I mean, like, I will fully put, in this case, I will fully put blame on the studio head. In the previous cases, I mean, like, yeah, that's direct. I think the other issues were directorial. I mean, I think when we talked about focus, you know, there was all this sort of like, you know, Warner Brothers trying to, you know, test the Will Smith, Margot Robbie combo, and I don't buy any of that shit. I wanted to ask you guys how you felt about the movie, at least in terms of their friendship, and I'm not sure how effective it is or appropriate. You know, they're misfits, and it almost seems to send the message that in order to fit in, you need to do something extraordinary, like save the world, instead of necessarily, you know, being yourself. And I'm not sure that even the message of this film, this very, you know, film that we all sort of feel is backwards, is even that good of a message. J Money?
You know, it's interesting because I think that I guess what I would say is I got the impression that it said, you know, be yourself, find your own individuality, but also it said don't be afraid to take charge of your environment and also be more responsible about people around you. It's like the tone of the movie in a lot of ways was like, you know, they dealt with these characters, these boob, which are essentially self-absorbed beings. So it kept trying to emphasize the fact that they were not thinking about others. But at the same time, you had these two characters, like you're saying, these misfits, who are trying to find their identity. And there's a strong current of, like, you know, just be yourself, accept yourself for who you are, even if you're different. So in that sense, it almost felt like there were two different, like you're saying, kind of two different conflicts there. You know, to me, it's like there was a bunch of half-baked ideas that didn't really find resolution. I guess from my point of view, it's like what you're saying here. It's like they kind of muddled through some sort of, you know, bigger issue, but they didn't really tie it together in a satisfying way. I don't know if I would say that it was like if that it was a dangerous thing, which is kind of what you're saying, I think.
I mean, dangerous is not the word I would use. I mean, I just feel like probably inadvertently it sort of sent this message that I mean, I think in their mind's eye, their suggestion, what they wanted to say was be yourself. You know, even if you're a misfit, be yourself, and other people come to follow. But in order for people to accept them, they had to do these extraordinary things, which I don't think is a good way to suggest that message. I mean, I think what it suggests is what you need to do something extraordinary for people to notice you or accept you, and that's not the message I think we should want to send.
Well, I feel like that was more the case with O, the main character, than with Tip, with Rihanna's character. Well, what is it that you feel like that she was doing that was so extraordinary?
Well, I mean, I sort of put them in the same boat, but I mean, like, you know, driving a car across the country and, you know, across the world, excuse me, you know, flying a car across the world to find her mother. I mean, they suggest she's, what, 13 years old or something?
Yeah, she's supposed to be 12. I mean, I think that's part of the problem with her character design and also the way that she was voicing it in general, is that it's really hard to nail down exactly what her age is and how old she's supposed to be in this movie.
Only O is developed as a misfit. She just talks about it. She's like, oh, I don't fit in at this new school, and blah, blah, blah. We never see anything like that. And I don't know how you would necessarily, but, I mean, there might have been some way. But yeah, there's a performance issue, but there's also a script issue.
Sure. I mean, I guess I feel like that was put together to have that kind of storyline. You know, for me, it's like they didn't really develop either of these characters so well, so it feels like they were trying to figure out a way to make them develop this close personal bond in the road trip movie, which, you know, I think I had a hard time believing that they could bond just in general because of the premise, but also because they just didn't seem to really have that much in common one way or the other. Like, it just feels like they were trying to pick out this one thematic element to sort of tie them together in a nice package, and it didn't quite land.
It almost seemed like a forced message, like a forced, like, you know, thing that, you know, we need to have a positive, you know, spin on this story so that, you know, kids can get behind it and learn something, and it seems sort of shoehorned.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that.
David Joe dropped out for a second, but now he's back. Where are you? He's in a whole new place. Where are you? Are you in? Did you switch rooms?
I'm just on the other side of the room. It's actually a suite, so.
It's a massive complex where you live with butlers.
Yeah.
So much butlers.
That's that. I noticed it. I don't know, J Money. Did you notice that he dropped out for a second?
Yeah, I feel like there was a loss in our group here. was a
But
deep.
I mean, we wound up not missing you at all. But now you come back and you're in a whole new space. That's or at least it looks that way. Just the other side of the room. That's pretty cool. Let's move on from home. Unless do either of you guys have something you want to say before we move on?
God, no.
No, I think we've covered it.
I just want to reiterate how awful the soundtrack was, and what a major flaw that was in this film. I mean, that was probably the #1 issue. But this sort of one thing about tonight that I was excited about is this creating a forum for talking about the sort of rivalry between DreamWorks and Disney. DreamWorks came around in 1998. Their first feature was a film called Ants. And they started out really strong. I thought it'd be interesting to sort of compare these two companies. Do you guys have any thoughts overall about DreamWorks versus Disney?
Yes. I guess I'll jump in here. Yeah, I mean, I think that DreamWorks has had a really weird mix of both incredibly interesting and fiscally massive hits, and also a lot of really forgettable filler-type movies. I mean, they have so many kind of franchises that they've developed between the Shrek thing, obviously. There's How to Train Your Dragon now, which has become really big. There's the Madagascar franchise, which is still pumping stuff out. And then there's just all these other one-offs that are just kind of out there and forgotten. And I guess I feel like, in some ways, they're definitely considered a second-rate compared to some of the other bigger ones, like Pixar.
Well, Pixar is a part of Disney, so that's the number one thing that we need to bear in mind. Can you guys see the chart I just put up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pixar's part of Disney. Pixar wasn't part of Disney 10 years ago, and I think
Pixar was a part of Disney 10 years ago.
That Pixar and Disney are still sort of separate entities, but they work together. I mean.
No, I mean like Pixar is a part of Disney.
Well, Pixar's a part of Disney, but it's also a relatively autonomous part of Disney, because it was to begin with.
All right, but I mean, like for the sake of sake of this discussion, Pixar and the Pixar films are part of Disney. If you look back at this chart, you'll see Monsters University and Cars 2 are both Pixar films. Pixar used to have a lot more output than two films, and that I mean this chart is 10 films per company, and it's only in the last 5 years. So with that in and of itself is kind of interesting at the output of these two animation powerhouses. What's interesting is that what's not on if you want to talk about Pixar, what's not on this list is the films that come right before this, and this could suggest a decline in Pixar. In 2009 was Up, 2008 WALL-E, and in 2010, right before Tangled, which would have been right before Tangled, is Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3, Up were both nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, in addition to Best Animated Film, and of course, WALL-E was not, but WALL-E's exclusion was one of the reasons they expanded the nominees to begin with. So, Davey Joe, do you have anything on the comparison of these two companies?
It's tough for me because I haven't seen so many of the movies. I think on the DreamWorks side, I've seen Home and Kung Fu Panda.
Have you seen all the Kung Fu Pandas?
I have not. Actually,
just the first
Kung Fu Panda 2. I think I just saw the first Kung Fu Panda, and that's not even on your list, so I lied. Yeah. So I don't have a whole lot to add, but.
Do you consider these two companies evenly matched? And when I say two companies, I mean Disney/Pixar. And
I mean, evenly matched in the sense that from an output point of view, yes.
No, but not from an output point of view, because that really has little bearing on this. I mean, just in terms of the actual quality that's being produced, because we're talking about the perception of these two companies now, which really doesn't have to do necessarily with just how many movies they produce.
Well, I would say no. I mean, I have seen a good more of these films. Just look at some of the powerhouses on the Disney side. Davey, you would love Big Hero 6 if you've not seen it.
No, I need to see it.
So, I mean, the biggest difference when I look at these films is scripts. I mean, I think that's what makes the difference. And you look at those films. Did you hear the part where I went through the films you must have, because the thing was up where I said Wreck-It Ralph is great. Tangled is great. Frozen is great. Big Hero 6 is great. And Frozen's beyond great. That was a monster. No pun intended, because it came right after Monsters University. It was a monster at the box office. Frozen, we haven't seen the likes of Frozen, that kind of money for animated film in a long, long time, if ever. But you know, on the DreamWorks side, you see a lot of duds, and I mean, most of the films aren't very good. The only good one on that list, I would argue, is Puss in Boots, and that is an offshoot of the Shrek franchise.
Right.
They do recycle the Madagascar franchise, the Kung Fu Panda franchise. I thought the Madagascar films are terrible, like just very poorly written. You know, I also almost like Home, in the way these jokes, the jokes are sort of like flat and lame, and really seem to be condescending to a younger audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, I guess I would say it's a very second-tierish kind of level of animation and of script writing in general. Although it's interesting that Home, Home got bumped from its original release time to make room for the Penguins movie that came out in November. DreamWorks decided to push it. Originally, it was slated for a November release, and DreamWorks decided to push it. So, you know, clearly they also have a way of moving around their elements in a way that they think is more profitable for them. I think that there are certain properties they've developed which are working a lot better for them, and they're willing to take, I think they're willing to put out filler to try to just capture whatever audience they can, because they know that it's not necessarily going to be the biggest thing.
Well, I mean, I guess Disney's not as willing to do that, or I mean, I guess maybe the Planes movies are filler, I guess.
I think that, I think it's interesting, because even you're saying, I don't think it's quite fair to equate Pixar and Disney as the same sort of thing. I understand that Pixar and Disney work together and that Disney owns Pixar, but there's also different levels of what Pixar has produced. I mean, there is Planes 2, for instance, the kind of thing you're talking about, but then there is WALL-E. I mean, there's a whole different...
The Planes movies, strangely enough, and I know where you get that, because the Cars movies are Pixar's, but the Planes movies are not.
Huh.
I understand that. But even Cars 2 was kind of a derivative, movie in general. It was one of the first, or Cars in general, I think, was one of the first flops for them, wasn't it? I mean, flop for Pixar is a relative thing here, but I think it's also telling that, like, for instance, you're saying it's been a long time, they don't put out a lot of movies. This year they're going to release their first full-length feature for the last 2 years, I think. The Inside Out movie with Amy Poehler, which, also looks like a return to form for them for that kind of level of prestige. And I think it actually looks pretty good, but I guess we'll see what happens.
Sutton, how was Kung Fu Panda? I did not see it.
I thought it was funny. I think it's Jack Black. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember really liking it a lot. I don't have a whole lot. I don't remember it very well, but.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. One of the things that is talked about a lot here in the animation circles is how the very first Oscar for Best Animated Film was in 2001, and Shrek won that year. And DreamWorks officially has not won since, and Disney's won. I think that's 15 more, and I think Disney's won 12 of the 14 more since Shrek won. In 2005, what's that?
Did Brave get nominated?
Brave won.
Oh, Brave won? Yeah. Okay.
And Brave's Disney.
Yep.
And Brave beat Wreck-It Ralph, so that they had two Disney in that one. But yeah, it was. I mean, that sort of thing, like, because Katzenberg's a well-known entity, so I almost think like people kind of like to see him fail. But I mean, one caveat I just want to point out for accuracy's sake is in 2005, Wallace and Gromit's feature did win Best Picture. I forget the actual name of the feature, Wallace and Gromit's Day Out, or I don't know, whatever it is they did. The Curse of the Were-Rabbit or something, maybe. Wallace and Gromit, that was officially released by DreamWorks, that Wallace and Gromit film. And that did win the best animated film, but that's not really considered an in-house DreamWorks thing, because that's sort of an acquisition, and Nick Park was doing animated films before DreamWorks. They just sort of like acquired him. In terms of the Disney Pixar thing, I mean, like, it's just sort of how I see it. I mean, like, I feel like they are, yes, I mean, Disney has several different animated sections of their world, and Pixar's just one of them. But there has not been a Pixar film released without Disney.
Okay.
Feature. There's not been a feature, and even the shorts were eventually picked up by Disney. There's not been a Pixar feature not released by Disney.
What do you feel about these other companies that are starting to hone in on what I think would be DreamWorks kind of territory? There's, oh geez, the names are escaping me right now, which is ridiculous.
Well, the one I wanted to bring up is, in particular, well, Illumination is probably the largest, and they've got an exclusive deal with Universal right now. And that's the Despicable Me Minions group. They're the big up and comers. Blue Sky is another one.
Blue Sky,
and they're with Fox, and they are they're the Ice Age films. But really, they've only really had any success with the Ice Age films, which is why we keep getting the Ice Age films.
Well, that's in and of itself, that's kind of unfortunate. What about the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs people? Who are those?
I don't know for sure. I do know, but the other one I was going to bring up is Laika, which is more of a stop-motion animation house. And they did my favorite animated film of last year that I've talked a little bit about, that I've recommended to you guys, which is the Box Trolls. And the real difference between the Box Trolls and the Disney Pixar films is the scripts. And I mean, I want to say, in fairness to Disney, whether it's a Disney film or a Pixar film, the scripts tend to be the strongest. And that's why maybe that's part of why I align them the way I do. But I feel like Tangled, Frozen, Wreck-It Ralph are just as strong as Up and WALL-E. If not stronger.
I don't think I would necessarily agree with that, but I also think that they're good entities in and of themselves. I mean, I guess I feel like there is a distinct difference between the kind of movies that you're talking about there.
All right, so you feel that Pixar should be? We should have three columns here: one for Pixar, one for DreamWorks, and one for in-house Disney.
No, all I was saying is that there seems to be multiple levels of prestige within the Pixar DreamWorks or Pixar Disney sort of entity in itself. Whereas DreamWorks feels like it's really kind of just your average sort of, let's try to catch up and let's try to put out whatever we can to pick up some sort of audience for these entities. Like Pixar Disney.
Well, I mean, I think part of the reason the comparison is made to begin with is before DreamWorks, just Disney monopoly on the animated marketplace, and every year, like from 1989 and Little Mermaid on, I mean, like obviously they've been doing animated films for years and years and years, but in 1989 with the release of Little Mermaid is when they really started to take off at the box office. Little Mermaid was a renaissance, followed quickly by Beauty and the Beast 2 years later, Aladdin, and then The Lion King in 1994. That was a whole new. It was a renaissance, and that was even before Pixar.
Wait, what was it? Was it a whole new what?
Oh no, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. I wasn't gonna say world. I was gonna say it was a whole new ball game, but anyway. Oh man, if I could. Never mind. I was gonna make more bad jokes. So when DreamWorks, I mean, and in fairness, the spearhead of those Disney. Do you remember who was in charge of Disney Animation at that time?
Wasn't it? Oh God, yeah. It was
Katzenberg. It was Katzenberg.
All right, that's not who I was going to say, but fine. Yeah, go for it.
I mean, that renaissance was spearheaded by Katzenberg, and then he went off and formed DreamWorks with Geffen and Spielberg, and so in 1998, Ants was born. Ants, Prince of Egypt, and Shrek are all really strong. They're not on the chart because they're not part of the 10 most recent. But since then, and they've tried to recycle Shrek so much in that, since then. But since then, I mean, it's really been nothing. And I think what you give credit to Katzenberg for is if Katzenberg did not challenge Disney with Ants, Prince of Egypt, etc. in 1998, and then Shrek in 2001, then these other companies would not be coming up as well. Like, they started to challenge Disney, and then others realized it was possible.
Well, that's interesting because I feel like I think a lot of things we're talking about right now in terms of the nature of Disney, Pixar versus DreamWorks has to do with Ants in a lot of ways. I feel like there was this instantaneous rivalry between Ants and A Bug's Life since they came out, roughly within a few months of each other.
Yeah, within a few weeks, and it was a very purposeful choice by Katzenberg because they had developed A Bug's Life while he was there.
Yeah, well, and I guess I understand the reasoning there, but it's interesting because it definitely set a tone. You know, it definitely set a tone for the way that people perceive the two companies and the kind of work they produced. You know, both were successful at the time in a lot of ways, but between the two of them at this point, you know, people respect A Bug's Life over Ants. Ants is sort of fallen.
I don't. I prefer Ants for sure.
But in terms of cultural respect, Bug's Life is still trumps Ants. And people will talk about this. They talk about the obviousness between those two things, like that. Ants felt a lot more like pop culturally, referential. It felt like it had a little bit more. I think maybe adult humor in a certain way. A Bug's Life was a simpler kind of storyline, but also the script might have been a little bit better for a larger audience at the time, and the animation itself was just a little more sophisticated. You know, I gave Ants at the time when it came out more props because it was actually more correct in terms of the insects. It always bothered me that A Bug's Life didn't have the right amount of arms. But if you stack them next to each other right now, I think that I would probably enjoy watching Bug's Life more, just because I feel like it feels less dated and less stuck at a certain time frame.
I disagree with that. I mean, I just think the script is stronger. The story is more interesting for me for Ants. I brought up the chart again so we can continue to get some perspective on this. I want to make a couple points. One is DreamWorks Animation is going broke. I don't know if you've been following how they've been shipped around, like, because DreamWorks no longer owns DreamWorks Animation. They're their own separate entity. So DreamWorks Animation is currently being distributed, I think, by Fox, and they were sold by Paramount a couple years ago. After the failure of Rise of the Guardians, I think was the real issue there. If you really wanted to distinguish Disney from Pixar, I mean, you look at these films, and I mean, Disney on its own is doing significantly stronger than the Pixar films in the last, it looks like just 5-6 years here. But I mean, between Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, and Big Hero 6, just in terms of quality, let alone business, all those films did well. Tangled maybe the least. Factoring in those films, I mean, I think Disney itself is doing just fine independent.
Yeah.
What's your favorite DreamWorks film and your favorite? Do we want to make it in the last? Why don't we make it since 2001 or since 1990 DreamWorks started? Favorite DreamWorks and favorite Disney animated film.
I'm going to pass it to Davy Joe first.
Yeah, I guess Kung Fu Panda would be the one that I've seen for DreamWorks, and it was good, so that's my favorite. As far as Pixar goes, I've seen a lot of the Pixar movies, and I think Monsters, Inc. would be the favorite one that I've seen. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I saw that in the theater, and I liked it a lot. And I've seen Finding Nemo. That was excellent. And I saw the first 2 Toy Stories, which were also very good. But Monsters, Inc., I'd say, is my favorite of the Pixar movies I've seen.
J Money. And I mean, it doesn't need to be Pixar, Davey. I just want to be clear. It could be Pixar or Disney.
Oh, this is my favorite Disney movie that I've seen.
Okay. J Money.
I'm going to go with How to Train Your Dragon on DreamWorks' side, which I actually found quite enjoyable. And then I guess I might go with... you know what? The Incredibles is probably still my favorite, ultimately.
Oh, you stole mine. You stole my number one. I was also going to say The Incredibles from 2004. So smart. There's a connection, too, I think, between Incredibles and Big Hero 6. That is interesting to think about. But The Incredibles is actually incredible. And as far as DreamWorks is concerned, I actually feel like I've got to go all the way back to the original Shrek. I enjoyed the Dragon films too, but I mean, Shrek is just so smart and clever and reflexive. I just think there's so much going on in Shrek. The long list of films that they have that are not even close to being as good as Shrek or doing the business of Shrek is the problem with DreamWorks. I mean, they've got Dean Blois, I think is how he pronounces his name, from the guy who did the Dragon films. I mean, DreamWorks has a talent there. I just wish he would maybe stop recycling the Dragon films. Good films, but I want to see what else he can do. Is he a one-trick pony? I mean, doing two good Dragon films, is nice, but What else? What else can you do? In the midst of this animation discussion, if the audience has not seen the Box Trolls, I highly recommend it. You know, Leica is a new player in this situation. Granted, they're stop motion, but script-wise, Box Trolls is a really strong script, and that's the key that I think. You know, a lot of these animated films talk down to the audience, and that's what the Disney films don't do. You know, we talked about Leica. I don't know how big of a player they're going to be in stop motion because they're stop motion. But what about Illumination here? Do you think they're a major threat to these two?
I guess I would say that just among people, you know, anecdotally that I know this summer, a lot of them are really looking forward to the Minions movie. And I know that Despicable Me and Despicable Me 2 have done very well for themselves, and I think that they've.
Well, I mean, but not necessarily from a business point of view. I mean, just from a creative point of view. Has the
point of view, all I've seen is Despicable Me, but I also like Despicable Me a fair amount. I guess I would say that I put it into the same tier as like How to Train Your Dragon. I also happen to like the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs a fair amount. I mean, there's certain movies that are I think you know, just relatively well done in general. Are they the same as like a Frozen? I don't know because I haven't actually seen Frozen, but they are the same to me as like.
Yeah, I like Despicable Me too, but I don't know if they have the same effect. Those films have the same effect as some of these Disney films, like the Frozens and the Wreck-It Ralphs and the Tangleds, and you know, and going further back to Up and Wall-E. I mean, it's a different echelon. You guys are like the only people who have not seen Frozen.
I don't. Yeah, I think I've been actively avoiding it in a lot of ways just because of the overexposure to it. But JB, I did see Tangled, and I guess I would have put Despicable Me and How to Train Your Dragon in the same sort of general grouping of that.
With Tangled?
Yeah.
Tangled, I just saw recently. I guess I avoided for the same reason you guys had avoided Frozen. But it was my sister was in town a couple months ago, and they were playing it at El Capitan here in Los Angeles, which is sort of a big old-time movie house specifically owned by Disney, so they do a lot of revivals and such. And I saw it for the first time, and I thought it was lovely. It was glorious. It was fun. It was smart. It was funny. Great performances by Zachary Levi, Mandy Moore, Donna Murphy, the Tony winner. Good songs, and I think that's another element of where Disney rules is hiring these songwriters. You know, they help the business of the films and also the quality of the films in getting this story across. I mean, they help the business with the soundtracks and the merchandising, but even within the films, these songs are entertaining, they're sharp, they're funny, they're great songwriters, so you want to sing along with them, and that enhances enjoyment overall. So that's you know, DreamWorks has never really come close to that level of music in the films, and those are the two things that I think differentiate the two is the music that we just talked about, and also just the quality of the screenwriting is so much better. And I mean, those are two things that DreamWorks can easily improve upon by hiring the right people. And I know you don't want to become Disney too, but there's a formula here, and these films are working, and they're working with, you know, in 4 quadrants in some cases.
Yeah, no, and I guess, you know, in a lot of ways, I feel like saying I didn't expect it to be as good as it was would sum up how I feel about a lot of the movies I just picked out. I think there's been a lot of pleasant surprises that have come out of this resurgence in animation in general for the last 10 years. There's also a lot of things that are just obviously kind of derivative.
All this,
you know,
I mean, we've talked about the reasons, but is it fair to say that Disney is still the king of the mountain?
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
Davy Joe, I mean, your favorite remains Kung Fu Panda, it sounds like, or do you agree that Disney is still the king?
Well, no question about it. There's no question about it. I mean, it's almost easier for me because I haven't seen the movies. I can just look at those 2 lists and see, you know, which ones are more in the public eye, more in the, you know, I guess the lexicon, the things that people recognize at any rate. It's Disney by a long shot.
All right, cool. I think it's time to move on to the Indie Spotlight. You doing okay there, Davy Joe?
I'm awesome. I'm glad we're doing the Indie Spotlight now.
Yeah. Long time. You could just think I'm there, Davy.
I teased it a little bit last week. That'll be our 3rd consecutive foreign film of the for the Indie Spotlight, and it's a Swedish film, Force Majeure. We talked about it a little bit during the Oscar preview. I brought it up because I'd mentioned the lead actress should have been nominated person in the person of Lisa Levin-Kongsley, and I believe these guys have seen it since the last time we talked. So it's tonight's discussion topic. You guys have seen it now, right?
I have.
I have also seen it.
So what did you guys think?
I liked it a lot. You know, the feeling that the movie gave. I mean, I think some people, you know, I've read a little bit about this, and some people are kind of saying that it's kind of like a dark comedy. but it's hard to it's a movie that's tough to classify. I think that you know, there are parts of this movie that really
It's funny because I would actually almost exactly describe it as a dark comedy.
Man, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's pretty emotional. I mean, it anyone who's been in a relationship that's had a a tough time, sometimes it just really gets in you. Like it kind of gets you. You know that feeling, that feeling of just just unease, and you know that there's something wrong, and the movie really does capture that.
Before we get too much further, David Joe, do you want to sort of summarize the story for us of Force Majeure?
Sure.
Very impressive. Very impressive.
You'll just I got to do it once so that you never want me to do it ever again. All right, so it's a family that takes a ski vacation, and at the ski resort they're doing controlled avalanches. So they set off charges on the mountain, and they bring down snow in a controlled way. But at one point they set off some charges, in the avalanche comes, I think, maybe a little faster and a little closer to the resort, to where the people are eating in a cafe, and the snow looks like it's going to come at them, looks like it's going to bury them. In fact, it doesn't reach them. There's just some smoke and some maybe some dust from the snow that actually does reach them, but it doesn't actually bury them. It just makes everybody think that they're going to be buried. And the family that's there, the mom and the mom just kind of grabs the kids and tries to shelter them, and the husband, he just runs away like.
Yeah, and afterwards he sort of denies it or doesn't remember, and she tries to get him to admit it, and that's sort of like the central premise of what goes on here, is the after effects of his ability or refusal, it's unclear which, to help them in that moment of crisis. And it's sort of a similar premise to a film called The Loneliest Planet from, I want to say, 4 or 5 years ago. It's an American indie film directed by Julia Locktev with Gael Garcia Bernal, and similarly, they're on vacation, and they're approached at gunpoint, and in a moment of panic, he quickly puts his newlywed wife in front of him, or quickly hides behind her when he's at gunpoint. It lasts a millisecond, but it basically ruins their relationship, even though they're newly married. This one's a little stronger in the sense that it's a little better paced to begin with, a little more interesting characters, and also the way that it sort of approaches all of the familial dynamics in this film. The addition of the children, they didn't have children in that film. The addition of the children, raised the stakes a little bit. J Money, what did you think?
I also liked it a lot, and I guess I would say that I would probably put this into a dark comedy kind of area. But I think that it's a kind of that takes a lot of humor out of really tense and awkward situations. So it's so emotionally charged at all times that it's hard to say that it's really a comedic film. It's really not a comedic film in and of itself, as much as it's a film where you're sort of watching the characters go through the motions of dealing with trauma in a relatively kind of self-absorbed way that makes it seem a little funnier.
Yeah, but J Money, there's this scene with that other couple with the beard and the very young one. They visit them, and it's a long 15-20 minute scene, but it's uncomfortably hilarious.
I think it's a little bit more than just uncomfortable. That's my point. It's a scene that involves a lot of really not just awkwardness, but also a lot of post-traumatic sort of stress that is very apparent in the way that the woman is handling the situation.
All right, fine. Semantics, uncomfortable, painful. Yes, I'll give you painfully hilarious. But I mean, I think, and you also think about that the janitor that watched them fight from afar, things like that. Those little details are simultaneously true to life and humorous. And I think the humor helps make the drama more dramatic, and that's why I have no problem calling it a dark comedy. But that's exactly what makes it a directorial achievement. One of the chief roles of a director is tone, maintaining tone, creating a certain kind of tone. But there's a lot of different tones to balance in this film, and that's what's unusual and fascinating about it. Between the comedy, between the drama, between the satire, between the pain, all the while feeling very honest, real, plausible, and that's what makes it fascinating.
I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. I think that it's important to note that the reason this movie works is because it tackles all these different tones that you're talking about in a really successful way. The other thing I thought that was actually kind of amusing about it was the way that everything is sort of emotionally avalanched in this movie as well. I love the fact that it took a while to sort of build to the point that it was trying to do with the plot. That you sort of slowly settled into the fact that there was something that was going to happen. You could sense it because of all this sort of dramatic tension and some of the scenery that they used on, in the background. And then this thing happened that was obviously very dramatic and intense. And then you watched the ripples from that echo through first their relationship and then this other relationship of this other couple that they'd run into, actually a couple different couples really, up to the point towards the end of the movie. I don't want to give anything away there, but like to the point where they have their own breakdown kind of as a family, and then sort of a coming together at the end in the face of adversity again. So it felt like it was a really satisfying long burn of this sort of rolling tension.
I really like the methodical pace. I think it really allows them to explore the human condition. And I don't want to sound overly pretentious using that phrase, but it really explores not just the familiar relationships, but the relationships with the friends. I mean, like even like the male friend, like he doesn't know what to make of this. Like he's like, I would never do that, but this is my friend. And I mean, like the marriage, the relationship with your children. It explores all these things, and it obviously, none of us here have experienced an avalanche or anything, but I mean, like near-death experiences or scary situations come up all the time. And, how we deal with these moments of crisis, that's a big question. And not something that gets asked a lot about in films like these. All the more reason why it was a compelling watch.
I'd like to ask you guys both independently, what do you think the ending was? Do you think that there was some sort of tie-up to this, or do you feel like there was kind of an open-ended question about the relationship in the end?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things about the end that we could talk about. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but I mean, first, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene where he sort of gets redemption, and there was one theory, bandied about at the discussion afterwards that she potentially got in distress on purpose to allow him that opportunity.
Oh, that's interesting. Because
we all know what a good skier she was. I thought that was a really interesting theory. I'm not 100% behind it. I just thought it was worth bringing up.
It's funny because I definitely didn't read it that way either. And I really don't know if I totally buy that, because I feel like part of the reason for what we're referring to happening is because we got to see her react in a sort of a similar fashion in a lot of ways. I guess I meant more in terms of even just the, and I'm trying not to give this away, in the final scenes where they're together with the rest of the people around them, and there's a sense of the main character, the husband there, having sort of an internal resolution. What was actually resolved for him?
I think for him, there's this close-up at the end of the film that, I mean, obviously he's redeemed himself a little bit, but I think that close-up in the end of the film suggests that he's improving. He's even improving in his own self-image, but there is lingering doubt and shame that I don't think it necessarily means the end of the road. I just think that, he's going to need to do some work to get over that sort of stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I think that moment is really what I'm trying to parse out in this conversation. But yeah, that's great.
I mean, I think that it's definitely on thin ice, that relationship.
I disagree. I mean, I understand I might be in the minority on this, but I feel like we live in a very cynical society, and I think that's what most people would extrapolate, that they're doomed. And maybe this is an overly optimistic view, but I feel like, you know, if she were going to abandon him, if she was going to give up on him, she would have done it sooner. I mean, I don't think that all is lost. I think that she feels that, and I think that's part of the pain that she felt, is she felt like there was something to fight for there. And in spite of, you know, him working a lot and, you know, the distance that he had and some of the things that he doesn't like about himself, I think that she did feel love for him, and that's what keeps her going. And I think there's a lot of work to do, but I tend to be of the mindset, and I'd like to believe that their journey leads them to a better place. They went through this horrible thing. He learned some things about himself. And the other thing that close-up does, I think that you don't feel guilt and shame if you don't want to improve it. I don't think he's going to, you know, repeat that. I think he's going to be on his best behavior for a long time. And my hope is, you know, improve on some of those things. I understand that's optimistic, but, you know, I don't automatically go to the pessimistic. And a lot of films, I think, would suggest that they're doomed. But I don't think there were other signals to suggest that they were a bad match or a bad couple. I just think that they were a real couple that had issues. And I mean, any person you're married to or with, you know, there's going to be conflict of varied nature that you can either work through or not. But she didn't. My impression was that she wasn't ready to jump ship, and he's certainly not either.
I think that what the director does is he creates a tension, and you don't know whether she is really giving him a chance or if she's just going through the motions to keep the kids pacified. You know, you can't really walk out on your husband when you've got the kids at the resort there. The scene that makes me think that this is at least a possibility is, of course, when the daughter is just pleading with her mother to comfort the father when he's having his breakdown, and then she sort of reluctantly does that. So I mean, I'd like to think that you're right, but I don't know that this thing lasts another 24 hours once they get home.
Yeah, the kids are a factor too. I would like to believe that her connection to him, you know, she feels something there too. I mean, she would feel that loss. She lost respect for him a little bit, if not a lot, but I don't think she's ready to go.
The question for me is kind of like, who is this movie really about? Is it about the wife, who's the actor again, JB?
Her name is Lisa Lovin Kongsley, spelled Kongsli. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, but that's my guess at pronunciation. And if you remember, she was one of my picks for the should have been nominated for Best Actress Academy Award. I think her performance is really strong.
Yeah, I don't really have a problem with that assessment.
Sure. I mean, as a nominee, I don't know that she'd win necessarily, but it's hard to argue. It's great. It's a great performance.
The movie kind of evenly splits time between the two different characters, but it's also, to me, it's like, which one is this really about? Is it about this guy's development through this process, or is it about this woman's development through the process? If it's about the guy to me ends up being ultimately kind of a comic, you know, foil to this whole thing in a lot of ways, because it seems like his drama is so over the top, whereas with his wife, it's more, I don't know, emotionally edgy, you know, in a way. And it's kind of like the question about whether or not they continue as a relationship after this movie comes down to whether or not you think this really is a movie about her or about him. If it's about him, then they probably do.
I don't think that necessarily suggests that it's his film. I think it's okay to have two protagonists, and I think they do. I think
it was about them throughout almost the entire movie until the very end, when the very end decided to linger on the husband. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, maybe this movie is really about his journey entirely.
Well, I mean, I think the last shot, I mean, there were some shots of her at the end too, maybe not as tight as that last shot of him, but you know, he is the one that needs to do the work, right? I mean, I think we're a little clearer on where she is at the end of the film. Maybe not clear on what she's leaning towards when they get home. I mean, I think she's still on edge, as evidenced by the bus situation. And you know, I don't blame her, but I also feel like that there was too much parallel action between the two people There's two, they followed, as you intimated, they followed both of those people around the same, about the same amount of screen time, both the husband and the wife. So I mean, I think there was enough throughout the film where they covered both of those people like almost equally in terms of screen time. So I don't think that last shot necessarily suggests that it was his film. I think it was both their films. They both had journeys. I mean, he's the one that made the mistake. He's the one that has the work to do. So I mean, there's a number of reasons why they could have ended for the shot with him, but I don't think that necessarily suggests that the film's more about him. I think it's very clearly to me about the two of them more than anything. I bought their behavior. Like throughout the whole time, as extreme as it seems sometimes, it was an extreme situation. I bought her inability to let it go. I also bought his initial denial that led to the breakdown. I mean, on one level, I think that he was denying it so much that the extremeness of his breakdown was because of all the suppression. But also, I think that the initial breakdown was, I mean, like this is quite. Might be extrapolating a lot here, but I think his initial breakdown might have been tactical. In other words, he knew this denial thing was not going to fly much further. Like the evidence was stacked against him, and he needed to switch tacks real quick. And I think that his initial breakdown was more like, oh, I'm not getting away with this. Let me see if I can play the sympathy card, and I think that was the initial thing. But then I think this is a brilliant choice. I think as he started to fake the breakdown, it started to become more and more real for him, and he started to, the shame was just so overwhelming, and I think that was an unusual and beautiful choice.
Yeah, but his breakdown really ultimately centers around the idea that he doesn't like himself in a lot of ways, and that to me was more comical than anything else.
I mean, it all feels plausible and true. I mean, and all the more compelling and riveting as a result.
Really support him as a great character, just in general. I mean, it didn't support him as a great person, I guess is what I would say, not a great character. It ultimately that his breakdown ends up being his own self-involved.
Look, it's not like I'm going to vote for him for Man of the Year. I'm just saying he's not an awful person. I mean, like, he's a very flawed individual, but he's not a bad person. Like,
right.
We know bad people do awful things. He did something bad, not criminal, just something crappy. And he should be ashamed. I mean, I don't know for sure. I mean, because the thing is, like, it's not like he made a premeditated choice either. Like, it was an instinct thing, survival instinct. He ran off. It's in all of us. We all have the survival instinct. We wish he had the forethought to think of his family first. I hope that I would act differently, but I don't know for sure. I've never been in that situation.
Yeah, but his issue isn't really the way that he reacted to the avalanche. It's how he reacted to that reaction.
Agreed. The thing that was worse than anything was the denial afterwards. But I mean, I can understand that too. I can identify more with his level of flawedness than I can with most villains that you see in movies.
Yeah, but I think one of the reasons why this movie is so brilliant is we don't really know whether he was that whole breakdown that could have been a total manipulation.
I feel like I just said that.
Yeah, no, you did, but you said that you thought, and I think it's a completely reasonable, and I think it's a good possibility that it started as a manipulation, and then it became real as he flew into it. But I don't know. I mean, we don't. It's not knowable. Man, I don't know. Now I want to watch that scene again and see if I can pick up something, because I don't know what to make of this guy.
Well, that's what's so great about it. It's so open to interpretation. That's what makes it compelling, I think.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So out of all the indie spotlights, where does this one rank that we've done so far? I know it's only been like 5 or 6.
Top for me, at least. Yeah.
I think top 2, maybe Leviathan.
For me, it's still The Hunt, which I think was last week's indie spotlight, the Danish film with Mads Mikkelsen. I think that's still the first. If I had to rank them out of our indie spotlight so far, it'd be The Hunt first, Blue Ruin, and then Force Majeure right after that. So you audience members out there, you're looking for indie films to watch, start with The Hunt, Blue Ruin, and then Force Majeure. And Davy Joe's favorite is Leviathan. I haven't seen that one.
I think so, but if someone said The Hunt or Force Majeure was better, I wouldn't fight him too hard.
And that's strange because he's normally very violent. Before we move on to the official classic movie of the week, we got a viewer request, believe it or not, to because last week we talked about Hannah and her sisters, and we talked a little bit about Woody Allen's career, and so we got a request for each of us to break down our top 5 favorite Woody Allen films of all time. So we're going to do that right now. And so why don't we start with you, Davy Joe, you're number 5.
All right, my number 5 is Manhattan. I maybe this is a little low for some people, but I think it's a great story. It's a story, obviously about him falling in love with a much younger woman, which we can say what we want about that. But what really sticks.
Were you gonna say it happens to you all the time, Davy Joe? Is that where you're headed?
Yeah, something like that. Not where I was headed, but anyway, I think what really sticks with me about this movie is the cinematography, the black and white cinematography, and the way that he made the city look. It's just a great movie. It looks gorgeous, and that's always what I remember about Manhattan. It's just
for what it's worth, that cinematographer's name is Gordon Willis, and in addition to shooting a lot of Woody Allen's films in Woody Allen's heyday, Gordon Willis is probably best known for his underexposure work when he shot one of the most famous films of all time, The Godfather. So that's another one of Gordon Willis's claims to fame. One of the probably 2 or 3 greatest cinematographers of all time. J Money, you're number 5.
We're doing back-to-back 5s. Okay, my number 5 is Match Point, which I picked in a lot of ways because I feel like it brought me back to Woody Allen after kind of a lapse in me, kind of concerning myself with his movies.
Yeah, I remember a lot of the reviews talked about the return to form for Woody Allen at the time. They compared it to The Player in Robert Altman's return to form in The Player to Woody Allen's return to form in Match Point.
It's definitely not a very Woody Allen-ish kind of movie in a way, although there are certain qualities to it. But I also just was very pleasantly surprised by it, and also just really thrilled by the movie in general. So it ended up kind of nudging itself into my list. And I will say, just on the list part, it was really hard putting together a top 5 list because there's a lot of things I had to kind of put away to the side that I really like, but I had to narrow down based on just my overall sort of effect.
All right, my number 5 is a little different in the sense that, there's a period of Woody Allen's career, I think that in the early to mid-'80s, he was doing a lot of experimentation. In between Manhattan and Hannah and her sisters, I feel like he was doing a lot of trying and playing around with the cinematic format and playing around with structure and things like that. And sometimes there's some films that didn't work so well, but there's some films that worked really well, but they weren't like super typical Woody Allen. And I think they don't get talked about as much. And that's where my number 5 comes in. It's a film called Radio Days. Have you guys seen Radio Days?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And no qualms about it being number 5. I thought I would get in trouble.
No, I'm not. No, it's a great period piece. It's a great movie.
It's pretty unique in the Woody Allen canon, and he's not in it all, but he's voiceover, and I really just love the nostalgia of it. I think Mia Farrow is really strong in it. It's one of her stronger performances, and the structure is unique as well, but always interesting, really strong. I enjoy the film a lot. Davy Joe, time for your number 4.
Number 4 for Davy Joe is Celebrity. I love this movie.
Another black and white.
Yeah, I know. It's the scene that really sticks out to me is the Leonardo DiCaprio and how just absolutely crazy he is in the movie. And also, I thought Kenneth Branagh's his performance. He played Woody Allen amazingly. I mean, he was essentially the Woody Allen character in that movie.
Yeah, I had Celebrity as my number 10 film of 1998, that year that it came out. So I mean, I liked the film, but it's one big detractor for me was Kenneth Branagh. I think that he was not really playing a character. I think he was doing an impression of Woody Allen, and that didn't work for me.
Well, you know, he was definitely doing an impression, but I think that's kind of I'm assuming that's kind of what he was told to do. I
really doubt that for 3 reasons. First, Woody Allen doesn't really talk to the actors at all. Second, if he did, I can't imagine that he would say, do an impression of me. Not me, but Woody Allen. You know what I'm saying? And third, I'm not sure anybody really tells Kenneth Branagh what to do. And fourth, right. It's the sort of choice that is really an actory type choice to begin with. So, I mean, speculation, but feel pretty confident that that one's on KB.
Yeah. Well, okay. Anyway, the movie. I'm not going to get too much into it, but I thought Charlize Theron was amazing, and it's just I thought a really funny movie in the way that it sort of the commentary on modern celebrity and everyone's sort of chasing fame.
One thing that I want to add about that is I do remember that I was campaigning, if you will, for Judy Davis to be nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress that year. I think her performance in that film is really, really strong. The theme of celebrity comes up a lot, actually, in the Woody Allen canon. A little bit in Deconstructing Harry to some degree, but a lot with a film like Zelig. That's a main focus. So celebrity is a good film, but certainly not unique in the Woody Allen oeuvre. J Money, do you have anything on celebrity?
Anything about celebrity in general? I mean, I would agree with what you're saying about Woody Allen trying to sort of infuse his movies with deconstructing celebrity himself. I mean, it's interesting because I think Woody Allen as a person has probably never really felt comfortable with celebrity, with his own celebrity, in the sense that he seems very reserved in a lot of ways, for reasons which maybe are more clear now than they were 20 years ago.
J Money, you're number 4.
My number 4 is Manhattan. We've already discussed Manhattan a lot at this point, so I'm not going to say too much more about it. But I will say that it's a movie that I've actually grown to love even more, just now that I'm living kind of in the general area of Manhattan, in a way that I think that I like.
Now that I live in Brooklyn, I appreciate Manhattan so much more.
Exactly. I'm like, that looks familiar from a distance. It's a kind of thing where, like, it speaks also, but not even just the fact that it's where it is geographically, but also just where it is in terms of the lives of the characters in the movie are things that I probably identify with a little bit more these days as well. So it's a movie that's really grown on me as much as I liked it initially when I first saw it. It's a kind of where it's become much more comfortable and it's fit on me a little bit better over the years. So it has made my number 4.
Well, it's funny. I thought you were going to be really upset with me when I had Manhattan at number 4. I thought you were going to give me grief that it should be higher, but since you had it at 4 too, it feels so much better. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to deny Manhattan. It's great. Now we're done talking about it. We've all had it in the top 5, but all in the back half of the top 5. So that's really interesting. So let's move on to number 3. J Money, why don't you go first this time?
My fear this time, and it's funny. This is one of those things where, again, with actually coming up with the list, I had to reevaluate some stuff. My number 3 is Mighty Aphrodite, which is a movie that was, I think it came out really strong and then was almost instantly forgotten. I don't really feel like a lot of people talk about it anymore. But I also feel like it's one of his best sort of later comedic works. And I also think that it's interesting because I feel like there's a lot of things that are in Mighty Aphrodite that are in a lot of his other earlier works as well. But because of the age he was at when he was creating it, it seemed to gel better for me. I think because it seemed like his character became more desperately funny in it, as opposed to just being kind of a little creepy,
Yeah, I have a different sort of experience with this film. First of all, I don't think the Greek chorus element works so well as well as they had hoped. Secondly, I think that I saw this film after working with Mira Sorvino, and that may have colored my opinion of it to some degree. I wonder if those that voted for her for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress that she won in 1995, if they had worked with her as well, if she would have still won. But regardless, this film didn't have that sort of impact for me.
I know we're sort of waiting to talk about how we put together our list in general, but I guess I will say that with my list, it came down to movies that I think were more actually effective towards me as opposed to movies that I think that I necessarily respect in a lot of ways. I mean, I guess I feel like I put together a list of 5 that were probably in some ways more influential in terms of how I approach Woody Allen movies later.
Davy Joe, Mighty Aphrodite?
It's not one of my favorites, but I like the film. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but it's not one that really stuck with me. I should probably revisit it.
All right, Davy Joe, time for your number 3.
Deconstructing Harry. I love this movie. I like the it's got a the way he has all these different stories, and he kind of intertwines them into the film. They're just so brilliant, these short stories. The one that I think sticks with me the most is the one at the bar mitzvah with the Star Wars theme. It was great, and also the one where the guy's actually a cannibal. I don't want to wreck too many of the short stories, but it's just a really funny story, and I'm not to say what the ending is would be too much, but there's a sort of an allegory at the end where Woody Allen just kind of knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, this was going to be, when we talked about honorable mentions, this was going to be one of the ones that I brought up. Probably number 6 if we went that far. I think it's a highly underrated film. I think it's really interesting that the 90s we talk about as like sort of when Woody Allen was not doing his best work, with save Bullets Over Broadway, and yet here we are. We have not mentioned Bullets Over Broadway, and we've got 2 films from the mid 90s, Mighty Aphrodite and Here, and Deconstructing Harry, as the number, in the middle of our top 5 list. So. It's interesting, and I agree, Davy Joe. It's a highly underrated film, very sharp, awesome structure. I think it's his most Fellini-esque work. Jay Money, any Deconstructing Harry thoughts?
I actually have not seen Deconstructing Harry, so I really can't talk to it. And it was, I think, in a lot of ways, it was at a period that I just was not paying attention to Woody Allen. So
my number 3 is actually from the 80s, but the late 80s. It's not really part of that experimental period that I was talking about earlier. It's not. I think the film that is admired but not really talked about, and it's called Crimes and Misdemeanors. Have you guys seen that one?
Oh, I've seen it.
I've seen it.
I've seen it. It's a fantastic movie. It's kind of very dark, very brooding, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's dark. It's really strong. Great performances. Martin Landau. Everybody in it is great. It feels thorough, and it's very sharp and intelligent, and it stuck with me. I think that when I saw it initially, I was turned off by the fact that it didn't seem. I think that maybe I had more comedic expectations for it than I had. But again, I guess it's funny that you're saying it came out in '89. It ushered in a phase for me where I was definitely less interested in what Woody Allen seemed to be producing at that point, and I feel like it's indicative of that. Number 2, Jay Money, you go. My number 2 is Love and Death, which was my number 1 last time when we talked about this, and it got pushed around just because I had to reassess the whole situation. But I think ultimately what I've discovered through this process is that I probably like the things that he does that are more silly and a little bit more surreal than other things that he does. I think ultimately, if I had to just pick movies that I ultimately enjoy watching over and over again, they're more in the love and death realm. They're more in the the bananas realm or the sleeper realm. Or they're more in the sort of area where it's surreal. It's a little surreal. Tiger Lily, even I really liked What's Up, Tiger Lily. Davy Joe, any thoughts on Love and Death?
It's been a long time since I've seen Love and Death. Love and Death's not one that really stuck with me. Again, I should probably take a look at it again, but I do remember liking it.
Yeah, that's a good one. Davy Joe, time for your number 2.
Annie Hall. We talked about it a lot last time. We don't have to get back into it again. So, yeah, number 2, Annie Hall.
Excellent.
My number 2, it came up a little bit earlier, and it's part of that experimental period that I talked about when I brought up Radio Days. And this is the film he did right before Radio Days, when he was just in a period when he was trying different things. playing with the format. And this probably is the most experimental out of all of them. It's a film called Zelig, which I think is brilliant on a number of levels. I think it tackles the issue of celebrity way better than Celebrity. Additionally, it is well before Forrest Gump in the sense of this character that appears throughout history, and it's well before. I mean, it's not well before, but it's just before this is Spinal Tap. So in a way, Zelig was on the forefront of the mockumentary movement, which is we've seen a lot of at least in comedy over the last 15, 20 years. Way ahead of its time, incredibly clever. Another great work, some more great work by Mia Farrow. Even Woody Allen's really good in this sort of chameleon type character. At the height of his cleverness, it's highly. I don't want to say it's underrated, but I mean it does feel like it doesn't get talked about as much. And those of you that watch my show Film Revision, both of you guys were on it at one point. But those of you that watch Film Revision might remember that it was my number 4 film of 1983. That was the year we were discussing when we did that show. So, yeah, I mean, I love the film. I admire it a lot, and I think it needs to get reevaluated in a lot of different ways.
No, I agree with all that. The movie is one that I think I saw it. I think I saw it when I was a little kid in the house with my dad. I maybe he was watching it on HBO or something. But I think that the first time I saw it, I could tell that he was really enjoying it, and I didn't really get a whole lot out of it. And it wasn't until later on, as an adult, I think in sometime in the early 2000s that I went back and watched it again, and it's a great movie, it really is.
J Money.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly largely overlooked gem. I think it's the kind of movie that people are probably going to relish more and more as it gets older, because I think it's also become much more relevant at this point for people, and I think it's probably speaking a language that people recognize better. I mean, you're talking about the mockumentary, and I think at the time people probably didn't really necessarily know what to make of what he was trying to do, but I think at this point there's a language to it that we all understand, and I think that if people just went back and watched it, it would probably get a lot more buzz.
I hope you're right. All right, time for number ones. Davey Joe, you take the first number 1. Is it Hannah and Her Sisters?
Well, yes, it is.
All right, tell me why again.
It's just it's comfort food for me. This movie, I've revisited him many times. The themes of him looking for a religion, the scene we talked about with Barbara Hershey what's his name again? I blanked on it last week also.
Max von Sydow.
Yes, the Never Stop Throwing Up. It's a great movie. Again, I'll go through it again. The scene at lunch with the 360 and the cameras. It's just absolutely. It's captivating, and it's just a great movie. And the way, again, it's kind of like Manhattan. In the way that the city is shot, when they're kind of going through the different neighborhoods and showing the architecture, and it's actually for that purpose, to show the architecture.
Yeah, that scene felt a little contrived to me. I mean, I like the idea of the New York architecture, but I feel like they made the guy an architect or a building lover just to have that scene. It felt a little shoehorned.
You know what? I swallowed it. Yeah.
That's what I hear about you, Davey Joe.
Oh boy.
Oh wow. That's what this show has become now.
On that note, why don't you tell J Money?
J Money, number 1.
Okay. This is not going to be a popular choice, and I want to say that I think that my list is based on movies that I think affected me mostly, as opposed to movies that I think are necessarily his best movies, because my top choice is definitely not his best movie by far, but it's a movie that was really deeply relevant to me in my childhood, and that is, JB, Radio Days.
Wow!
Yeah. Radio Days is a movie that I saw religiously when I was growing up, and it had, in a lot of ways, a big effect on things that I was interested in at that time and developed interest in. I became very deeply involved in discovering the golden days of radio, for instance. I kind of invested myself in trying to find copies of old radio shows. I was, you know, I grew up in a place where I didn't have cable TV in general, so I was already kind of involved in radio, and I think that I was already involved in kind of a interest in nostalgia for this time period. So in a lot of ways, I feel very nostalgic about this movie that Woody Allen feels very nostalgic about, and it sort of collapsed my sense of time because of it. And I still love it in a very comforting food sort of way. By far, not his best work, but by far his most influential work on me personally.
I'm very pleased that you would think that. Yeah, very unique, very sharp, really good stuff. Okay, it's time for my number one, and you know, it's the obvious choice. It's my number 7 favorite movie of all time, Annie Hall. And I feel badly that I'm going with the obvious choice and not something a little more out of the box, but it's an obvious choice for a reason. I mean, it's his most personal and his most cinematic film simultaneously. I mean, it affects me, but it's also super sharply written, so well performed, so well directed. I love the way they use the visual media to externalize what's going on inside the characters' heads. Lots of creativity in the film, and lots of insight as well. You know, there's no shame in being second best to Annie Hall. It's too good for me not to name it the number 1.
It's everybody's mom's favorite movie, basically.
All right, guys, now it's time for this week's official classic movie of the week. As I was telling these guys earlier, here in Los Angeles, they recently had what's called the TCM Fest, which is the TCM channel, Turner Classic Movies. Annually, they have this event of classic films, and me and a small group went out to see this week's classic movie of the week. My 5th favorite film of all time is Dr. Zhivago. You see it behind me here. I own the film on VHS, which is why I had to get a YouTube title page behind me, because I can't hook up a VCR to this fancy new TV. But Dr. Zhivago from 1965, 5th favorite film of all time, celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. So we saw a restored print at the what's now called the TCL Chinese Theater, very possibly the most famous movie theater in the world. Here is a picture of me in this. It's not of me; it's of the screen from my seat. I had pretty good seats. It's so dark, it's hard to see anything but the screen. And that's not a still from the film. It's sort of like a poster they used a little tint on. I know you guys have not seen it yet, partially because it's 3.5 hours long.
Not like we're avoiding it because it's long. We're avoiding it because we don't have the time to put it in at the moment.
Because it's long.
Yeah, but it's not. I'm not turned off by the idea of seeing a 3.5-hour movie. Just to be clear here.
Impractical, but it is.
It's too late. Your image has already been damaged.
I'm going to try and get to it before next week or next episode.
Are you guys familiar with David Lean's work at all?
I'm not.
Not even Lawrence of Arabia.
I have not. This is embarrassing. No, I haven't seen that either.
Well, I don't want to discourage you guys from seeing it. I mean, in spite of its length, it's actually the details of the film that make it special. The way it uses its cinematography to layer the story and build meaning. That, you know, they'll assign colors to certain characters, but also, I mean, there's, you know, the flowers are meaningful. There's a lot going on, and in spite of its scope, in spite of all the politics and the revolution and all those things, at the heart of it's really a love story, and the love story itself uses a lot of subtlety, a lot of nuance. It's about the glances between these characters. And I think what's really interesting about the movie, without giving too much away, is and you know, when you guys eventually see it, let me know if you feel differently. I think this is a very film where you actually root for the infidelity, even though the wife is not vilified in any way. She's actually very sweet and pure. And maybe that is why you don't root for her. Maybe potentially, maybe she's too perfect. It's hard to say, but this film influenced me a lot in terms of how to use nuance to get a point across. You know, in terms of, you know, in spite of the scope of things, keeping a story grounded and making it about the moments in between the words. Epics of this kind were fairly common for its era. I mean, in the up until about 1965, this is when it started to die down. But I mean, films of this length were special films. In fact, in spite of its length, Dr. Zhivago remains the 8th highest grossing film of all time, adjusted for inflation. And of those, of the top 10, 3 of them, or 4 of them are over 3.5 hours long. Sound of Music, Dr. Zhivago, Gone with the Wind, and 10 Commandments are all in the top 10. And they didn't charge more money because it was longer, like they do for 3D. But they were event films that everyone needed to go see. So you prepare for the length. And I mean, I could watch 2 more hours of their story in this movie. I mean, I think that this particular film earns the length. Let's talk about the brackets. Dr. Zhivago appears in the 60s bracket. I screened it, not only did we see it the other day, but I screened it in New York in August. And it was in the 60s bracket, it's a number 4 seed going up against number 13 seed, The Servant. Have you guys seen The Servant?
No.
Servant's an interesting film directed by the name of Joseph Losey. Joseph Losey was an American director who was on the blacklist in the 50s, fled to England so he could make movies there. And so this is a British film directed by an American, written by Harold Pinter. It's one of the few, if not only, time that Harold Pinter wrote a screenplay directly without writing a play first. Servant's a really interesting psychodrama, fascinating film, a few years ahead of its time. Highly recommend it. And it's a great film, but Dr. Zhivago is tough competition, and Dr. Zhivago did win this battle. So Dr. Zhivago moves on in the 60s bracket. Have you guys even heard of The Servant?
I hadn't.
I want to say I have, but I could be wrong. I mean, at this point, we've just, you know, since you've discussed it and you're discussing it now, it sounds so familiar, but I don't know. Maybe not.
Dr. Zhivago also appears in our Best Picture nominees bracket, and those are films that were nominated for Best Picture but lost. And Dr. Zhivago was nominated in 1965 for Best Picture and lost to The Sound of Music. Stagecoach, number 13 seed here, was nominated for Best Picture in 1939 but lost to Gone with the Wind. So another tough matchup. Stagecoach was our classic movie of the week. I think episode 2 or 3? 2. I want to say it's episode 2. We did Focus. So we talked about that a little bit. I know, David Joe, you've seen the film.
I remember loving the movie. It's you know, it's a great movie. But I can't really tell you much about it at this point. But I need to see it again.
This was another tough, close vote, but Dr. Zhivago won this battle as well and moves on. So for those of you that are, you know, intimidated by Dr. Zhivago's length, I would say, you know, maybe give it a chance. You know, maybe on a rainy afternoon if you live somewhere where it rains. I do not, but you know, rainy afternoon. If for its 50th anniversary it's screening anywhere on the big screen, you must see it on the big screen. And the roadshow version that has the overture and the intermission. The music is such a huge part of Dr. Zhivago. All right, so you guys have a lot of homework to do for next week, and that is a good segue because it's time for me to talk about next week. Next up for review is the film Child 44 with Tom Hardy and Noomi Rapace. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that name. I probably should check that first. April 20th will be our next live episode. April 20th, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific, and we're going to talk about the film Child 44. Do you guys have any closing thoughts before we wrap things up?
Night, guys. It's been fun.
Jay Money, say something clever.
We are so long-winded. If nothing else, we are long-winded. That's how we make these things happen.
All right, guys, this was awesome. Thank you very much. Bye, Davy Joe. Bye, Jay Money. Until April 20th when we meet again. Good night, everybody.